Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona, and this is the TimeformUS Road to the Kentucky Derby series. This week, the focus is on 3 Kentucky Derby preps taking place around the country, all final round preps offering 100 Kentucky Derby qualifying points to the winner of each of these races. In this video, we're going to focus on the race at Keeneland. It's the final race of the day on Saturday, race 11, the Grade 2 Bluegrass, $800,000 purse. We've got a very interesting field of 9 runners signed on, but the clear star attraction is the heavy favorite on the morning line. That is Essential Quality, last year's Eclipse Award-winning 2-year-old champion, the winner of the 2020 Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Let's throw up the field for this race, and you can see Essential Quality, a very heavy favorite on the morning line at 3-5. And the choices in this race are pretty clearly defined. Highly motivated, also likely to take some money as the second choice at 3-1. We'll see how close these two actually end up in the betting, because they do appear to be the two standouts in this race based on recent form. But you've also got some class from the outside runner, keep me in mind, who was actually third in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile last year. The others have a lot to prove in this race, but there are some interesting fringe players, and we'll talk about quite a few of them as we go through all of the contenders in this Bluegrass Stakes. Before we get to those, though, let's take a look at the TimeformUS pace projector, and we've got a pretty unusual situation here, because for a Kentucky Derby prep race, there is just a surprising lack of speed signed on. Really, as you go through this field, nobody has much experience racing on the front end, and that's why you see the two favorites that are projected to be towards the lead in this race, those being the number 3 Highly Motivated and the number 4 Essential Quality. Again, neither one is really a front runner, but they're likely to show speed in this race just because all of the other runners are mid-pack to deep closers. So that's just how things shake out, and we'll see if that's a positive or a detriment for those two horses to have to adapt their running styles to be more forwardly placed than I think their connections would have expected. But I think we are likely to see a relatively slow pace in this Bluegrass, just given the fact that nobody has that front running kind of style. Moving on to that heavy favorite, as we look at the contender past performances in this race, the number 4 Essential Quality. I mean, there's really not a whole lot to knock about this horse. He's undefeated in 4 career starts. Obviously, he did nothing wrong last year, winning that Breeders' Cup Juvenile in his 3rd career start. And he looked very good coming off the layoff in his only other start as a 3-year-old so far in the slop at Oaklawn in the Southwest. Let's take a look at the replay of that race as they come through the stretch. By the time they got to the quarter pole here, he had already taken the race over under Luis Saez, who had worked out a very good trip for him, got him off the rail early, got the kind of wide trip that you wanted to get that day at Oaklawn when the rail seemed to not be the place to be. And he's able to kick away at the end of this race to put Spielberg, who's really turned into more of a bridesmaid this year, in his place. Spielberg, a brief threat, but just settles for second here. Jackie's Warrior, the other major player in this race, just didn't seem to handle the stretch out or the slop, as he was not really a factor here. And Essential Quality did what he was supposed to do. He ran to expectations, but the waters do get a little bit deeper here in this Bluegrass as he faces some other horses who have run a little bit faster. He has to stretch out to 1 1/8 for the first time, but that's not supposed to be a problem as a son of Tappet. And we saw the pace projector. He is a horse who has been forwardly placed in the past, albeit not outright on the lead. But if you look at his Breeders' Futurity from last year, he got the kind of stalking trip that he's likely to work out here. And he was able to win that day over today's rival, Keep Me in Mind. So just a lot of arrows pointing in the direction of Essential Quality here. I wouldn't necessarily say that I love him for the Kentucky Derby at this point, but I think you have to consider him as a very formidable win candidate in this Bluegrass, just given the competition and the likely trip that he's going to pull. His main rival is the horse that's posted right to his inside, the number 3 Highly Motivated for Chad Brown and Klarovich stable. This horse also showed promise as a 2-year-old and put forth the best effort of his career on that Breeders' Cup undercard, actually the Saturday card, when he won the Nyquist Stakes by over 4 lengths, going 6.5 furlongs. He stretched out for the first time in the Gotham last time in March, and we'll take a look at the stretch run of that race. He was bet down to be the heavy 4-5 favorite here, but things didn't quite work out that well in the early portions of this race. He was off a little bit slowly, had to be steady moving down the backstretch, was shuffled back, a little out of position early in a race that just didn't feature that much early pace. So he had some ground to make up as they came through the stretch. I thought he did well here to stay on through the late stages. He's plugging away at the leaders and is getting to them at the end of this race. Wouldn't say that it was the kind of effort that people were hoping for coming off the layoff, but I think it was a constructive race that should allow him to move forward off of it going into this Bluegrass. Now, talking about the distance with him too, if we have some distance questions about Essential Quality, I think we have to have more distance questions about Highly Motivated, because he's by into Mischief, who is a versatile sire, but is really known as more of a sire of horses that are best at around 1 mile. And on the dam side, there's not a ton of stamina pedigree there. The dam sire Warriors Reward short, again, more of a miler type. The Dam herself was a horse that would run on the turf and be best the distances from about 7 furlongs to a mile. So there's just not a ton of stamina breeding here, but perhaps he won't need a ton of stamina to get the kind of trip and be successful with the kind of trip that he's likely to get in this bluegrass. If the pace is slow and it turns into a sprint to the wire, I'm thinking that Highly Motivated is going to get sent to the front here, and that Essential Quality will be content to stalk him. So I think the trip could work out well for Highly Motivated, and we'll see if he's able to get the distance. The thing that I think Highly Motivated really does have going for him is Chad Brown's statistics in this situation. And we'll throw up some stats for Chad Brown that I pulled from DRF Formulator. And the filters that I used here are dirt races coming second off a layoff of 3 to 6 months in dirt routes. Chad Brown is an excellent 13 for 30. That's a win percentage of 43% with an ROI of $2.63. Just saying that Chad Brown often gets these horses to improve second off of a moderate layoff like that with these horses going in dirt routes. So I think we're likely to see a step forward from Highly Motivated. It's just a matter of whether he can handle the distance. And kind of like Essential Quality, I'm not necessarily saying that I love Highly Motivated for the Kentucky Derby going 10 furlongs, but I think he's meeting a pretty favorable pace setup in this bluegrass, and he might be able to get the jump on his main rival, Essential Quality. They're the two main players. Let's talk about some of the other fringe players in this cast that could potentially sneak into the exotics, beginning with the number 9, Keep Me in Mind, that horse who was third behind Essential Quality in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile last year. His return from the layoff last time was just pretty disappointing. He was among the choices in that Rebel Stakes Concert Tour. Obviously, nobody was beating him that day. He was visually impressive in victory. But Keep Me in Mind, he just never got into the race. I mean, he lagged towards the back of the pack early, as he is accustomed to do, but he never launched that late kick that we saw from him in most of his races as a 2-year-old. Just a really dull performance. I know he missed a little bit of training time coming into that, but I still would have liked to see him show some more signs of life. And given the likely pace scenario in this bluegrass, where he's just not going to get much speed to set up his late run, it's hard for me to see him finding the trip that's going to make him successful in this race. Another horse that some people might try to go to here is the number 1, Hidden Stash, who is coming out of races at Tampa Bay Downs. Got to be honest, I don't think that the 3-year-olds we saw at Tampa Bay Downs this winter are among the strongest out there. But we will take a look at his runner-up finish in the Tampa Bay Derby last time behind Helium, who is undefeated for Mark Casse. And Hidden Stash, he just did what he's been accustomed to do in his recent races. He got there, looked like he was potentially going to win the race, and just couldn't forge past the winner Helium in the late stages. He does have a little bit of hang in him. We saw it in some races prior to that when he would hang on his wrong lead and not switch over to his correct lead in the stretch. He did switch over to his right lead last time out in the Tampa Bay Derby, but still settled for second, and just feels like Hidden Stash doesn't really have that will to win. And he'd also have to run significantly faster to usurp the 2 favorites in this race. So Hidden Stash, not one that's really for me in here. Another horse that could come running at the end of this race is the number 5, Rombauer. He put in a pretty good effort last time to win the El Camino Real Derby, but that was a race that took place over the Tapeta surface at Golden Gate. We'll take a look at the stretch run of that race, and he did make a long, sustained run from far back. You see him on the far outside in those pink silks, and he's making up good ground at the end of this race. The problem is, as visually impressive as this late run was, he really wasn't beating the strongest field. The runner-up is a filly who just hadn't really shown much form at this level in the past. The others were more turf or synth types that aren't really the same class as the top 3-year-olds on this Derby trail. So while Rombauer ran relatively well in the context of this race, he's meeting much tougher horses in this spot. He was no match for Essential Quality, despite getting a very favorable pace setup in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile last year. So I feel like he'd have to take a significant step forward, and I kind of put him in the same boat as a horse like Keep Me in Mind, who's not going to get the right pace setup in this bluegrass. Another horse with synthetic form that's coming into this race is the number 7, Hush of a Storm. You might remember he was entered last week in the Jeff Ruby Stakes, scratched, and opted for this spot instead. He's probably finding a tougher race here, and I think he would have had more success in the Jeff Ruby Stakes because the horse that he beat last time, Like the King, was actually the winner of the Jeff Ruby, so you would think Hush of a Storm could have been successful there, but instead they're trying the 2-year-old champ in this bluegrass, and the real question for Hush of a Storm is the dirt, because his one prior dirt start was not that great at Churchill Downs, and since then he's turned into a real Tapeta specialist at Turfway Park. it's just unsure if he can handle the dirt, and he's got to do so against the best field of his career and run a new career top speed figure. So just too many questions for me to take him, even at a large price in here. I just think he's not that appealing, and there are some other fuzzy horses who might be able to do better in this spot. And the one of all of these fringe players that I think is most appealing is the number 2 Untreated. He's a horse that's coming out of a pretty impressive maiden victory last time out for Todd Pletcher. Let's take a look at the stretch run of that race from Tampa Bay Downs. Now, this was not the strongest maiden field in the world, but I thought that Untreated was pretty impressive winning this race, drawing off from the rest in the stretch, only going 1 mile and 40 yards, but he's finishing off this race like more distance should be no problem for him. As a son of Nyquist from that Uncle Mo line, you can see he's got that long striding action that is so typical of those Uncle Mo progeny, and he's finishing up this race pretty well. He's got stamina on the bottom side of his pedigree, so I think more distance is not going to be a problem for him. My biggest issue with Untreated, and the reason that I can't place him higher in my hierarchy for this race, is the fact that Todd Pletcher just has incredibly poor statistics with this move. With last out maiden winners in dirt route graded stakes races over the past 5 years, Todd Pletcher is just 1 for 41, a 2% win rate with a 24-cent ROI. I think there's a perception out there that Todd Pletcher does a lot better with these recent maiden winners moving into Derby preps than he actually does. He actually almost never wins with them. So I feel like this is just a tough ask for Untreated in just the third start of his career to come out of that maiden win and face 2 of the top 3-year-olds on the Triple Crown Trail. So I'll use him underneath, but I'm not viewing him as a win candidate in this race. And with that, we can throw up my top selections in this race. I went for the number 3, Highly Motivated, just trying to take a small shot against the number 4, Essential Quality, who's going to be a heavy favorite in this race. I respect both of these horses. I think one of them is likely to win this race. I just think at a slightly better price, and given the trip that he's going to pull that I think will be favorable for him, I'm going to put the number 3, Highly Motivated, on top for Chad Brown, using those 2 over the aforementioned number 2, Untreated, and the number 9, Keep Me in Mind, who should be come running late. So that's a look at the Bluegrass on Saturday at Keeneland.